Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday everybody. We begin with US-China relations. As we touched on in yesterday's video on Tuesday of this week, the White House press secretary confirmed that Biden and Xi will meet in San Francisco this month around the time of APEC. US outlet Politico writes that the White House press secretary seemed to accidentally reveal the announcement, expressing, quote, "This is going to be an important diplomatic conversation. It's going to be in San Francisco. It's going to be a constructive meeting. The president's looking forward to it," end quote. Previously, a White House readout from Friday said the two countries were working toward such a meeting. The following day, yesterday, PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin refused to directly answer a question about this Xi-Biden meeting in San Francisco, expressing, quote, "China and the US agreed to work together for a meeting between the two heads of state in San Francisco. As Director Wang Yi pointed out during his visit to the US, we can't leave it to autopilot," end quote. State-run Global Times published a piece the same day titled, "China again stresses road to San Francisco cannot rely on autopilot, avoiding confirming San Francisco summit," writing, quote, "The White House rushed to release information on a possible summit, which is apparently intended to convey both domestically and internationally that the US will undoubtedly succeed in this foreign diplomacy on its home turf," end quote. Meanwhile, also this week, Biden nominated his Asia expert with the National Security Council, Kurt Campbell, to be Deputy Secretary of State. US-based Washington Post writes on the decision, quote, "Campbell, 66, a veteran Asia hand and former Sovietologist, is the White House's Indo-Pacific coordinator." He indicated in remarks Monday at a Washington think tank that, if confirmed, he would continue to pursue the deepening of partnerships among allies and partners in the region, the fulcrum of the administration's strategy, whose unstated objective is to build a democratic counterweight to an increasingly authoritarian China, end quote. Interestingly too, while anti-American articles are still being published every day in state media, several high-profile pieces published in top outlets this week have signaled that, for now at least, the leadership in Beijing wishes to see some stabilization in the US-China relationship. Top party mouthpiece, the People's Daily, for example, this week published a special commentary called "Promote the True Stabilization and Improvement of China-US Relations," in which it expressed, quote, "Recently, China and the United States have concluded a series of important high-level exchanges, and people-to-people friendship has continued to write new chapters. There have been some positive signs in the bilateral relations, which have been widely welcomed by all sectors of both countries and the international community. The healthy and stable development of China-US relations not only aligns with the fundamental interests of both countries and their peoples, but is also a common expectation of the international community. Both sides should adhere to the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, and based on the consensus reached at the Bali meeting between the heads of state, work to stabilize China-US relations and return them to a healthy and stable development track as soon as possible," end quote. There are positive signs from the US too. Today, for an example, in an exclusive report, the Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes that, quote, "Amid improving relations between Beijing and Washington, the United States is expected to send its strongest ever delegation to next week's China International Import Expo," end quote. Now, these are all, of course, positive signs, but we must manage expectations. These look simply to be moves to help stabilize and erect guardrails within the relationship. Both sides are still very much locked in a long-term security competition, and military friction, especially in the East and South China Seas, remains dangerously high. Next up, Rob Copeland, a reporter with the US-based New York Times, has written a book on Ray Dalio called The Fund, Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, and the Unraveling of a Wall Street Legend. Yesterday saw the publication of an extended article in the New York Times adapted from the book. The The article, like the book, touches on Ray Dalio's engagement with China and makes some rather salacious accusations about the Bridgewater founder in this regard. The article suggests that Dalio publicly expressed bullish support for China and its economy while secretly betting against China, and that he did this in order to cultivate close relations with Chinese officials from whom he could glean critical policy information which would then help him with his investment decision-making. Like I said, these are quite serious allegations which are difficult to prove, but at the very least we should take note of them. The New York Times article is titled, "How Does the World's Largest Hedge Fund Really Make Its Money?" And its part on China expresses, quote, "The longest-term project for Mr. Dalio was in China, where he made frequent trips. Mr. Dalio hired China Investment Corporation's former chairman to a cushy job as head of a Dalio charity in China, and he became close with Wang Qishan, who would later become China's vice premier and widely considered the second most powerful person in the country. Mr. Dalio would occasionally tell the Chinese government representatives that when they invested with Bridgewater, their fees were not merely being sent back to America. Whatever fees you pay, I will donate back to China personally," he said in one meeting, according to a person present. In media interviews, Mr. Dalio stuck to a fixed, laudatory line about the country's leadership. It was very capable, he said, over and again, sometimes repeating the phrase more than once in an interview. Those same leaders, he would also say, inside Bridgewater, were quick to ask him for advice. To any reasonable observer, and even to the Chinese themselves, Mr. Dalio was the paradigm of a China booster. But there was also an advantage that could be played. He asked the circle of trust to help him create a way for Bridgewater's funds to place bets against Chinese assets in an offshore way that China's government couldn't track. That way, when Bridgewater took the wrong side of China, no one would know." End quote. This is discussed in more detail in the book. Next up, we need to discuss a quite concerning development, China's concerns about genetic warfare. Hey everyone, if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all big helps, especially sharing with people who you think would enjoy this sort of content. And for anyone who wants to help me keep these episodes financially sustainable, open, free 6 times a week, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. And finally, we need to touch on a topic which may get the channel in trouble, but we need to cover the most important developments as they occur. The Ministry of State Security, China's top spy agency, in a long post published this week, has warned the country about the foreign collection of human genetic data for the creation of so-called genetic or ethnic bioweapons. These are specially engineered biological weapons that are capable of targeting members of a specific race or ethnicity. The piece is quite disquieting, to say the least, and it is a curious thing to post. It is very much worth examining how this top spy agency is thinking about this topic, and we are now quoting the Ministry of State Security piece directly. Quote, "Human DNA is 99.7 to 99.9% identical, and a small percentage of differences are key in distinguishing different races. If there are enough samples of human genetic material, scientists can analyze and understand the unique genetic characteristics of each ethnicity and race. If utilized by individuals or organizations with ulterior motives, this information could be used to develop genetic weapons that target and kill subjects of a predetermined racial or ethnic group." End quote. The existence of such bioweapons have long been dismissed by the mainstream scientific community as a conspiracy theory. In an interview last year with the Science Media Center, Richard Parkins, a senior lecturer in biochemical toxicology at King's College London, for example, expressed, quote, "It is highly unlikely that a weapon that targets certain ethnic or racial groups could be developed." End quote. A 2021 report by the James Martin Center, however, stated that such a weapons system was possible but very difficult to develop. warning, though, that advancements in DNA sequencing and artificial intelligence could change this calculus. This post by China's top spy agency not only argues that they do exist, but that, quote, some countries have armed themselves, end quote, with such weapons. This is the first time a Chinese state body has mentioned such a threat publicly. We also note that back in September, US-based The Washington Post published an article called "COVID Helped China Secure the DNA of Millions, Spurring Arms Race Fears," in which the publication wrote US intelligence agencies said in interviews that they had limited insight into how BGI handles DNA information acquired overseas, including whether genetic data from the FireEye labs ultimately end up in the computers of China's military or intelligence services. The piece, quoting an unnamed US analyst who specializes in China's biotechnology policy, writes that genetic information is regarded by China as an intelligence asset. Of course, it is impossible for us to verify whether these claims are accurate, but if top Chinese authorities do believe that other countries are developing these ethnic or racial bioweapons, then is it safe to assume that, at the very least, they are considering trying to develop them too? Or have already started? These are indeed very disconcerting questions to ponder. Okay. That is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. It has been a heavy episode, but nonetheless, I hope you can have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.